They say you cannot, some things that you see, you cannot unsee. Some things, once you've seen them, you cannot unsee. And that kind of happened to me about 35 years ago, on Maunday Thursday, in the middle of a seminary chapel in Camarillo, in California. I was playing with the idea of being a film director. And I really got caught up with this idea of a film director, of what I would be. It would be Maunday Thursday, it would be this night in Palestine, in Jerusalem, and we'd start with a sort of an outshot that would be zooming slowly in over the hills and into the city and along by the streets until we came to a house, the one that we saw, those of you who are here on Sunday, we saw in the streets of Jerusalem that were shown, the one that called the upper room, with the upper room. And in my vision, in my Spielberg vision, the camera zoomed in, and as we're getting close to the door of the upper room with a staircase coming down the outside, the door opens and people begin coming out and they're singing. They're singing on the way down, and they go out, and we watch them go up towards the other side of Jerusalem, and the camera swings back round and comes into the door. And there's no Mel Brooks moment. There's no sudden hitting of the glass ceiling and that happens with Mel Brooks. There's none of that. We just quietly go in to that upper room. And on the table, where there were cushions, there's a plate. And on it there are some crumbs and pieces of broken, unleavened bread, perhaps. And there's a little cup beside it. And in it had some wine still in the bottom of it. And then on the floor, right where people have been sitting, in the middle of the whole thing, bins like this, bowls like this. And not towels nicely in a basket, but towels that were clearly used, a towel clearly used. Just cast it out, cast aside. And the water is a little murky. And we pull back out. There's no dialogue. Things go dark for a while. Even in the middle of daytime, when daytime comes, things go dark for a while. And still we're sort of focused on that same little room door. And gradually, and very, very downtrodden and sad, come these same men, one at a time, and women among them, and one at a time. Maybe a couple of them in groups. And they come back in to that upper room. And the last one, absolutely beside himself, barely able to lift his head, is the one who was called the Rock, the one who was told by Jesus to be the head of the whole group, the one called Peter. And as he wanders in, he barely dare look up and ask what the gaze of the other disciples might be. But in fact, not any of them are feeling anything but shame that night. Because all of them, except one, that actually abandoned their master, their Lord. Maybe in my movie, some kind of melodic tune begins to play. Maybe I go acronistic, and maybe it's ubi caritas. Where there is love, God is. And suddenly the power of the bowl and the power of the towel grips their imagination. They remember his words. And maybe they whisper to one another as in their distress and even in their anger, perhaps to one another, their unforgiveness. They whisper to one another, didn't he say, a new commandment I leave with you? Love one another. Didn't he show us how did he bend his knee, and didn't he come and wash our feet, even though we may be protesting in our hearts? Didn't he wash our feet? And didn't he tell us, unless I do this, you can have no share of me? Didn't he bond us together by this action? Didn't he tell us as we serve one another, we honor one another? And didn't he tell us that as we love each other in that honoring, we actually mark ourselves distinct? By this they will know you're my followers, that you love one another. And then they look up at the table, and they see the reclining place where Jesus had been, and they see the bread, the pieces of bread that were broken, and they see the wine that had been poured out, maybe of the jug into the chalice. And they remember his words. This is my body broken for you. This is my blood poured out for you. And the flashes of image of his body broken upon the cross that they had just left, that they had fled from. The images of his blood that was pouring from his crown of thorns and from his whole being, mingled with water, came into their minds, but was transformed. His suffering was for them. By those very wounds, they were healed, and the world would be healed. And as much as you remember me as this broken, bleeding being on your behalf, I am with you. And the healing begins. I like to think that the forgiveness for Peter begins, surrounded by those images. And I like to think that Peter began to lift up his head and see himself as Jesus' loving eyes saw him, even when he first resisted to the washing of the feet. And Peter began to feel the restoration in his being. That, my friends, is church. That's why we're here. That's what all these symbols are about. Because it's the way Jesus said, I will be with you and I will be in your remembrance. And wherever he is, wherever God is, there is love, and wherever love is, there is God. And our world needs us to remember. Because our world needs to be able to say about some body of people, and maybe starting with us, how they love one another. How they love one another. Lord, teach us your ways. Grow us in your love. Help us to remember, to keep before us the bread and the wine, the bowl and the towel.